Good morning, everybody. It is Sunday morning. Right, I love it. We can wave at each other in the room. We can wave at the people online. 9:15-ish a.m. Central Time, Sunday morning. Means it is time for the CSLDallas Sunday morning Science of Mind class. And I am Tracy Brown. I'm so happy to welcome those of you who are in the room and those of you who are on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube or otherwise with us online. Please join me in taking a deep breath and allowing the release of that breath to center us in this commitment right here and right now to dive just a little bit more deeply into the teaching of the science of mind based on the writing of Ernest Holmes. And if this just happens to be the first time that you have joined in with the class, we on Sunday mornings just take a little small chunk of the writing in the textbook and talk about it. I talk about it, you talk about it, and so we always leave time, and in fact about half of the time, for questions and comments. How is it resonating with you? How have you used whatever we're talking about in your life, or what absolutely made no sense? And those sometimes are my favorite questions when people are like, made no sense at all, explain it to me a little bit more. So let's dive in. Today we're going to be technically beginning at the top of page 56. If you were with us last week, you know that we spent quite a bit of time on page 54. And what's mostly on page 55 is an example where Ernest Holmes gives an example of how we use our thought definitely and for specific purposes and refrain from being overly influenced by other people's opinions, other people's stories, other people's ideas. And so if you have the textbook, you might want to take 5 or 6 minutes sometime this week and read through that example, because it's just a reminder and gives us an idea of how to apply it. The one comment or the one line from page 55 that I will read because it sets us up for where we're going today is this one, and it is a couple of lines right in the middle of the page in that second full paragraph, where Ernest Holmes says, he says, what happens then, like you've set an intention and then you run into Steve at a restaurant or something, and you say, hey, Steve, I've got this intention I've set, and I'm working on it, and I'm really excited. And Steve is like, what? You're going to do what? Oh, no, I don't think that'll work. So what happens then, most of us want to shut ourselves off, but what Ernest Holmes says is this. This does not mean you should refuse to hold conversation with people for fear that they will neutralize the position which you have taken in your mind, but that you should refuse mentally to accept the false position. Then you can talk to anyone and not be disturbed. So this is critical, because what it goes back to is that each one of us has our own responsibility, not only to choose or define what is important to us, but to know when to what I think of for me as when to build a wall around that. Like, I'm clear about what I believe, I'm clear about what I need to do, and I will not be moved simply because another human being has a different opinion. I don't have to argue with them. I don't have to try to convince them to agree with me. I can say, oh, thank you for your input. I can say nothing and just let it go in one ear and out the other, because we all have had a lot of practice with that, right? Don't tell me when you were growing up, you didn't let what your parents say go in one ear and out the other. You ignored it. So you know how to do that. And that's all Ernest Holmes is saying. Do not let others influence your intention, your choice, or your direction. So we're going to begin reading at the top of page 56. Quote, "We are in the world and of it, and it is good that it is so. The world is all right when we view it correctly. Who knows what would transpire if all of humanity would speak the truth? It has never yet been tried. But let not the mouth of the profane hinder those who would enter, thereby keeping them from entering. The world has never yet followed the simple ethics of Jesus. Yet, the world is loud in its proclamation that it is Christian. This statement is not written in a spirit of controversy. It is one of conviction, and will make its appeal only to those who are convinced. A person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still." Many of us have heard that before. So let us return to the person who really wishes to demonstrate the supremacy of spiritual thought force over apparent material resistance. Let us put this treatment in the first person. I am a center in the divine mind, a point of God-conscious life, a point of truth, a point of action. My affairs are divinely guided and guarded into right action, into correct results. Everything I do, say, think is stimulated by the truth. There is power in this word that I speak because it is of the truth, and it is the truth. There is perfect and continuous right action in my life and my affairs. All belief in wrong action is dispelled and made negative. Right action alone has power, and right action is power, and power is God, the living Spirit Almighty. And Ernest Holmes goes on from that point to continue what is actually step 3 in a spiritual mind treatment, declaring and clarifying and describing what it looks like, feels like, and how we behave if we truly believe this basic premise that I can demonstrate the supremacy of spiritual thought over material resistance. In the third paragraph on page 57, Ernest Holmes continues, healing and demonstration take place as our minds become attuned to the truth of being. There is no process of healing, but there is generally a process in healing. This process is the time and effort which we undergo in our human realizations of truth. Okay, it's a bunch of stuff, bunch of good stuff. So remember, this whole chapter is about how to use the spiritual principle, how to use the Creator, how to use spirit in your life. We've already looked at what it is, how we define it, how we understand it. We've already looked at what it does. And now we are exploring, so how do I use it? Like, how do I use it? What is it that I am doing? How do I get in alignment with this spiritual truth? And so that's what we are exploring right now. So going back to page 56, where I started reading, we are in the world and of it, and it is good that it is so. The world is all right if we view it correctly. I almost stopped just there. Like, we're in the world, we're of the world, and it's good that that's true, because the world is all right when we view it correctly. And I can imagine that some people would read that or hear that and go, Tracy, he couldn't have written that. Like, the world is not all right. What do you mean if I look at it correctly? If I look at it correctly, I would see everything that's wrong with it. I would be talking about how in the world that we live in, the pattern of mass shootings and mass killing still occurs. I'd be like, what do you mean? I don't want to be of the world where 9 people can be shot and killed in a mall in Allen, Texas. I don't want to live in a world where there is racism and that there is violence based on race and ethnicity. I don't want to live in a world, I don't want to be of a world where the climate change is affecting weather in such dramatic ways I don't even know what to predict. So he says a lot. And I did really almost stop after 2 sentences. But I wanted us to look at it in the bigger context, because our focus is how can we use spirit? How can we be in alignment with spirit? So I'm going to make 1 more minute of comments, and then I am expecting that there will be comments from you, your examples, your questions, and how you are making sense of this. Who knows what would transpire if all of humanity would speak the truth? It has never yet been tried. But let not the mouth of the profane hinder those who would enter, thereby keeping them from entering. The world has never yet followed the simple ethics of Jesus, yet the world is loud in its proclamation that it is Christian. Ernest Holmes has spoken. So let's hear what you have to say about it. Ryan Brown, can you help us out?
Absolutely, and good morning to you, Dr. Tracy Brown, and good morning to everybody here in the room. And for all of those folks all around the globe watching us, welcome and thank you for joining us in community today. And as you were mentioning, this is an interactive experience, so we'd love to hear from the folks here in the room. and from the folks online. And there's some housekeeping rules with that. For people here in the room, just go ahead and wave your hand like you just don't care. And myself or the iconic Richard here with me will hand you one of these microphones. And you can always pass it to your neighbor if you see somebody's hand risen that's close to you. And for all of those online via Zoom, wave your hands like you just don't care by hitting that raise hand icon down below. Or you can always feel free to hit us up inside of the chat or comments, and we can bring that question or comment into the room. And for everyone around the globe who's watching us on Facebook Live, make sure to check in and say hello. Where are you watching us from today? And put your questions and comments inside of there, and I can bring those into the room as well. Now, I do see a person who's online. I just want to pull here in the room. Does anybody have a question? I see some eyes of burning desire. No? No? All right. So,
let's start online today.
Yeah, let's go to the online folks. So, Connie, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and join us?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Dr. Tracy, and good morning, everybody. Couple of things as you were talking. I watched the coronation of Charles and Camilla. I watched the whole thing from beginning to end. It was long. I got up early. It started at 4 a.m. our time, and I watched it till 8 a.m. And I watched it from a cultural perspective because I'm an anthropologist at heart, and I wanted to see it. But I was surprised, really, at how much they brought Christianity into it. And Christianity was very much a part of the whole celebration. And that was interesting to me. But then I also heard, and I'm very delighted, that Charles is interested in recognizing and bringing together all religions. That was so beautiful. Because what I think is that religions are all about one thing. They're cultural expressions of connection with spirit or God or whatever you want to say. That's my perspective. Seems like it might be his too. So that was really, really good for me. And it was one other thing I wanted to bring up, and I can't think of it now.
Well, you know that you can stop there, and then you can raise your hand again when you remember it after we hear from a couple more people.
Okay.
You remembered just now? Yeah. So I love that example, and I'm grateful that Connie brings it up. So there are a couple of things from that. One, watching the coronation and from a cultural view, right, versus just what the news says. But what's similar to what we might expect in terms of ritual and who's included and what is said or shared, what we might expect in the U.S., or whatever country we live in, and then watching what's happening in the UK at this very important event and ritual, and noticing similarities and differences. I think that's really a valuable thing. And then the piece about recognizing how much we bring into our rituals and our formal activities that reflects a specific religion or a specific spiritual belief system. And since I wasn't watching, I too am glad to hear that there was at one point a recognition that there are multiple faith systems and that we can and should recognize the beauty and the strength that comes from each of those different systems. In other words, from a science of mind perspective, one of the things that we teach is all paths lead to God. Because one of our basic tenets is that there's only one infinite intelligence, one source of life. And you can, there are 200 names for that source of life. And we often just refer to it as God because there's some common understanding. But yeah, it's like all paths lead to God. That's what we teach. So Connie, thanks for sharing that, because it's a reminder to us that we're not the only ones who believe that, yet we still have to be part of the group of people who models that. We are not competing with other religions. We teach about the common thread that all of the major religions seem to share in common under the surface. So, anybody in the room, question, comment? How does this conversation about being in the world and of it, and that the world is all right when we view it correctly, any reactions to that before we check again online? We are bringing a microphone. Please say your name for the people who are on the line and the people in the room who may not know you.
Okay, good morning. My name's Dennis.
A little bit louder, not for that microphone, but just in here.
Okay. About the world being right when you perceive it properly, or however he says it. I suppose if we have a tendency, or I do, and I'm sure because it's what you see, you pay attention to the relative. Here, this just happened yesterday. It just popped into my head about the absoluteness of the world. Okay, you know these flies, they look like big mosquitoes, but they're really just a harmless little fly. Well, there was one in the kitchen yesterday, and he's sitting on the counter. Now, 15 years ago, I would have just squished him. Okay, yesterday, I grabbed him by one of his tiny little legs, and I took him over to the slider, and I let him go. Because he's part of all of this. So, I guess I just didn't really realize it till now, but I do. I have evolved to the point of I do my best just naturally anymore to see the world from the absoluteness. And things like, okay, somebody's like speeding down the road or something, okay, I want to get angry, but then I thought, well, wait, maybe it's a mother, she's running behind whatever. There's always an explanation. They're not just always just bad people out there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Am I the only one who's like, that fly, spider, mosquito, whatever would have been dead in my kitchen? Am I the only one who will honestly admit that I would maybe think afterwards, but I would be like, oh, you would be appropriate and I could love you a whole lot if you were outside. But you have invaded my space, and my reaction is still the scream first. Well, maybe not for that, but but the scream first, the reaction second. And so next time, or if something like that happens, you, like me, be like Dennis. Be like Dennis. Thank you for modeling that. I think you're right. And it does definitely remind us that our judgment, our human judgment, that we have been socialized to simply react and not respond, that's part of what we are doing when we are practicing our spiritual principle. So I love to that you said, oh, I didn't even think about it. Like after now, the next day, you can go, oh, I really am seeing the world from the absolute, I'm seeing the world with the eyes of God, not the human eye. And that's what we are working for. And we do it and apply it in different ways at different times. So don't think because you don't apply it 100% of the time that you're not doing the work. It's all relative. All right, going back online.
Yes, and so we had a question come in from the chat.
Okay.
But before I say that, I want to say hello to all those who are watching us in the Philippines today. It's great to see you guys and see you checking in. So I have a question, and then I have a person with their hand raised as well. So let's start with this question. It says, how can I be of service to others if I am not willing to be influenced by them? What does Ernest Holmes mean by not being influenced by the world?
I love that question a lot. So, when we are living based upon and guided by spiritual principle, we have that as our guardrails. You know, when you're driving on the highway and you have merged in from the ramp and you're speeding up, and then you're in traffic and you're driving 65 or 70 miles an hour on the local highway. Stop, Jeff. Then we are affected by and influenced to a certain degree by what the other cars are doing. But I promise you, tonight, at 8:15, when I am on the highway driving to the skating rink, it matters not to me what other cars are doing. They are not going to make me decide to go to Reunion Tower instead. They are not going to make me decide to go east on Interstate 30 and drive to Rockwall. They are not going to make me, because I see someone taking the exit at Fitzhugh, southbound, I am not going to go like, oh, you know, yeah, I like that BMW. I think I'll get behind the BMW and get off at Fitzhugh too. So what Ernest Holmes is talking about is when you are in alignment and you are making your choices for your life and how you want to be as a human being in the world, that you are not influenced to follow or change your mind based on some surface interaction. He is not saying that you should not or could not have a conversation with anyone and consider what they have to say about it. He is not saying ignore something that indicates a change in path. So again, if I'm driving down the highway and I'm on my way to the skating rink tonight, I don't know why it's important for me to emphasize tonight, except it's Sunday. Maybe I'm reminding myself. If someone cuts into my lane and it's a 2 car lengths ahead, I'm not going to keep driving straight and ram into it if I can turn and go off on the shoulder or go into the next lane and avoid the collision. So some people would say, well, they influenced you on your path. No, they didn't influence my choice and my direction. I am responding to the condition or the circumstance that they may have initiated, but they are not changing who I am. And so when Ernest Holmes is using don't be influenced in this context with what we're talking about right now, he is saying be clear about what you're doing and why, and you are making your choices in alignment with what is in your spiritual truth and good. And the one final thing before we go to the one more person, to the next person, is this. I lost it just that quickly. Just that quickly. Influence, if someone cuts us off, their influence, yeah, I lost it. It will come back though, because I had already thought of it twice before. Ryan.
It was ice cream. I don't know why that wouldn't make sense, but that's the answer. That's what we were looking for. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Shauna to go ahead and unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Shauna.
Good morning, Dr. Tracy.
Hi.
Okay, so I'll be the person in the room that confesses that hearing that news yesterday was really tough. And the way I heard it is my daughter called from North Carolina. She grew up here. She grew up here in Richardson. We shopped a lot at Allen's Outlet, and she called just horrified, right? And I didn't look it up yesterday. I did not want to know the details. And this morning I did, briefly, just looked at the details. And I know the shooter. There was that shooter was in deep despair and deep anger and deep pain. I can understand that. I can accept that. I can forgive that. I can stay focused on my belief that automatic weapons have no place in this country, and I can continue to vote for leaders who will put gun laws in place. But I have a really hard time knowing that the leadership of Texas today has gone the opposite way and has allowed more and more guns and more automatic rifles and support that. So what do I do with that part? Just focus on what I want and understand that they're not going to change and we need new leadership? We have become the most dangerous country in the world if you take out the countries who are at war. And we think it's okay. It's hard for me. And I know what I want, and I understand my job is to focus on a world that's good for everybody and to manifest what I want in our world. But it's hard for me to see our country at a time when we seem to be going the opposite direction. It's hard for me. So I need some wisdom today.
First, thank you for presencing what I'm sure represents the feelings and the emotions and the beliefs of many people. And it is hard. What's important is that we don't do spiritual bypass. So Shauna, thank you for that, because when we recognize it's hard, it's challenging, and it's full, the circumstance or condition is full of paradox, we can't do spiritual bypass, right? We're seeing what is actually happening, and we are not pretending it is not, quote unquote, real. It is not capital R reality, the reality or the truth of spirit expressing, but it is lowercase r real in that there was a shooter, and there were people who were killed, and there were people who were injured, and there are millions of people who are reacting with pain and hurt and sorrow and confusion of the chaos that we as humanity inflict upon ourselves. So where do we go with that? With our teaching and our spiritual principle and what we know to be true. This is one of the many, many places where we get to remember that we have both individual spiritual work to do, and we must consciously and actively apply our spiritual truth in the collective consciousness. So when we say, well, I'll just pray about it and, you know, I'm doing my individual work and that's all I have to do, then we're not doing full spiritual bypass, but we are kind of skirting the responsibility we have to be involved to create or contribute to an environment where the consciousness that allows for mass shootings, the consciousness that allows for conditions and situations that make this a cultural norm, which it has become, that is the consciousness that we are driven to lead or to change. Now, the process for changing that, 1,000 people could use 1,000 different processes. So, you know, yes, how you vote does matter. Yes, whether you speak up or whether you talk to elected, that matters. But that doesn't mean everyone has to do the same thing. It may be you do something in your community, or it may be that you participate in a ritual or something that creates a vigil and a stand for peace or for love. There are 1,000 ways to do it, right? So we never ever would think about telling you, oh, you need to vote for this legislation or vote for this person or insist on this particular action. We would never do that. What we do say is, when you are clear about how the world looks when spiritual principle is applied, that is going to direct you into the action that you personally take and the people you influence based on who you engage with or who you have access to. And that we must take both personal and collective action. So on a personal level, in this 24 hours post, not quite 24 hours post a very visible event, we look at what is going to return me to be centered in peace and in love. That may be I light a candle and meditate 10 minutes every hour. That might be I call a practitioner, or I sit with a practitioner and spiritual coach after service today because I need someone else to join me in holding this truth, because I'm hurting so badly that I don't know if I can believe my own words right now. Right? That's why we have practitioners and spiritual coaches. That might be that I get on a Zoom call with 4 people or 10 people who I can pray with together, or I can simply release some of my fear and tension and sadness. That might be I go online and just put in webinar or seminar or online vigil, and look for other people I can connect with around the globe who have a different consciousness. But whatever I do something through spiritual practice that allows me to be, as Ernest Holmes said in the first sentence that I read today, to be in the world and of it, and to return again and again to what I know is the harmony, the unity, the love, and the wholeness that this world has been designed to be. And then, once I'm grounded again, then I do my forgiveness work and I choose what actions to take next. Okay, we are very near the close of our time. Do we have one quick comment or question in the room? We do have one, and then we are going to close out. Your name is?
Faye. And I just wanted to say, so occasionally I do rideshare, and I drive for one of the companies. And so what I noticed, I would have riders that would talk. And so one particular day I had, there was someone that came into my lane. And so the rider just started talking about how people do that for insurance claims and that kind of stuff or whatever. And so it was like cancel, cancel, delete, right? But it reminded me of a time in the past where somebody actually did that to me and they hit my car. And so I noticed this spiral mentally. And so I started doing the treatment. Everybody and everything is I have an affirmation, everyone and everything is a channel for my good, including me. And so I started doing a treatment around everybody on the road is God in action. And so I just kept affirming that so that I could feel safe and I didn't go down the spiral of, somebody's going to try to hit my car. And so this conversation gave me the idea. It was like, oh, well, let's take it a step further to where it's like, well, what can I say that will shift the conversation or shift that person's consciousness so that nothing seeps into mine as far as the conversation? Because if I've noticed when I've allowed one conversation to go on, the next writer might be the same conversation. And so if I'm able to shift it for myself and the energy within my car, then I can have a better experience.
Yes. And that is what we each are responsible for. Not denying the existence of different opinions, different experiences, different ideas. In fact, we're happy for that because that is representing the multiplicity of the infinite intelligence that has created all of life. Yet, it's our individual responsibility to create the environment, the atmosphere in which my thoughts and my choices are able to thrive. And as I do that, to also be aware of how I can do that into the collective consciousness. That is a part of my responsibility as well. But if I can't do it for myself first, I'm not able to do it for the collective consciousness. So that's all the time that we have for today. If you are online and you have a comment or a question please still put it in the chat because we'll look at it a little bit later and comment. And if in the room you still have a question or comment, know that we have a little time before this morning's Sunday celebration, where we will be diving into the idea that health is a spiritual practice. For the whole month, that's what we're going to be looking at. Health is a spiritual practice. Any important or quick announcements, Ryan?
Yes, ice cream. That was the answer. Yes, that's all I needed to say. Thank you.
Well, everybody, we are in May now, and every week be sure to check out our artist of the month, and also do something this week that honors Asian American Pacific Islander Month. Learn something new. Learn something about people who have been created by Spirit in those categories and those identity groups that may be different from our own, because that is one way for us to contribute to understanding and loving the entire world. If this is your first time here and you're in the room, Julia is over here with a welcome kit and can answer any questions you have. We'll see you next week, Sunday, 9:15 a.m. Central Time.